John's journey began on the quiet shores of a lake, where the wind carried stories from distant lands, and the early morning light shimmered across waters that seemed ancient and endless. Though he grew up among fishermen, surrounded by the rhythm of oars slicing through the surface and nets cast with practiced motions, his heart often drifted to questions that the sea could never answer. He felt an inexplicable pull toward something larger, a destiny that whispered to him through the waves long before he knew what it meant. Growing up, John watched his father lead the family boat with firm hands and a steady gaze, teaching him discipline not through words but through example. The long nights at sea shaped his endurance, while the calm dawns shaped his quiet spirit. His mother, gentle yet unwavering in faith, filled their home with stories of God's promises, planting seeds of hope in him before he was old enough to understand their weight. Her voice echoed through his heart for years, becoming a compass, guiding him toward unseen truths. Even in childhood, John sensed that his life would eventually break away from routine. Travelers and rabbis who crossed Galilee spoke of prophecies, of a light soon to appear among Israel, of a Messiah who would restore what had been lost. John listened more closely than others his age, not out of curiosity alone, but from a stirring conviction that something in those ancient promises was quietly calling his name. He didn't know how or when, but he felt certain that his life would someday intersect with something divine. The days in Galilee were simple, filled with hard work and shared meals. Yet John often gazed beyond the horizon, as if waiting for a sign. The stars at night seemed brighter to him than to others, as if heaven itself were leaning closer. While James spoke of fishing routes and profitable seasons, John drifted into thoughts of ancient prophets and heavenly visions, wondering what it would feel like to witness God's hand moving visibly in the world once again. Everything changed on one ordinary morning, when the sun rose hot and the smell of the sea filled the air as usual. John and James were repairing nets torn by the rocky seabed when a man approached the shoreline, his presence quiet yet commanding. He looked nothing like the extravagant teachers John had seen before. Instead, there was a profound calm in his eyes, a depth that made the world momentarily still. When he spoke, his words were simple, yet they carried the weight of eternity. "Follow me." That was all he said, but the words pierced John's soul more powerfully than any storm he had ever faced at sea. They carried authority, promise, and a strange sense of home all at once. Without hesitation, John felt something shift inside him, something that told him this was the moment he had unknowingly waited for his entire life. He dropped the nets, the boat, the familiarity, and stepped into a future he could not yet imagine. Walking beside Jesus was nothing like John had envisioned. Every day felt like stepping deeper into a world woven with purpose. Jesus spoke of love in ways John had never heard before, love that healed wounds, love that restored dignity, love that reached even those who had been cast aside by society. Watching him teach crowds, comfort the broken, and challenge the self-righteous opened John's heart to a truth he never knew existed. What surprised John most was the bond forming between him and Jesus. It wasn't based on status or position, but on something deeper, a quiet understanding that didn't need many words. John often found himself close to Jesus during gatherings, simply listening, observing, absorbing every glance and every gesture. He sensed that Jesus saw something in him, something he hadn't yet discovered within himself. He witnessed miracles that defied everything he understood about the world. He saw the blind regain sight with a touch, the lame rise to their feet, the hopeless breathe again with renewed purpose. But beyond the miracles, what struck John most was the compassion behind them. Jesus didn't perform wonders for spectacle. He did them out of a love so profound that it humbled John to his core. Then came the day on the mountaintop, a day John would remember long after his hair had turned white and his strength had faded. Jesus' face shone like the sun, his garments glowed with heavenly light, and the air itself felt alive with glory. John trembled as he witnessed Moses and Elijah speaking with him, a moment that dissolved any remaining doubts about who Jesus truly was. The revelation marked him forever. As the final Passover approached, a heaviness filled the air. Jesus carried sorrow behind his eyes, though he still spoke words of hope to those who gathered around him. During the meal, when Jesus knelt to wash their feet, John felt his breath catch. The one who calmed storms, fed crowds, and shone with divine glory was now stooping low to serve in the most humble of ways. John realized in that moment that greatness in God's kingdom came through love expressed in service. In the garden later that night, John sensed the world shifting toward darkness. Jesus prayed with an anguish that shook John's soul. He had never seen the Master so vulnerable, so burdened. The weight of what was coming hovered over them like a storm about to break, and John felt his own heart tremble with fear. He could not speak aloud. Still, he remained as close as he could, unwilling to leave Jesus even when exhaustion threatened to overcome him. Then came the torches, the soldiers, the betrayal. Chaos erupted as Jesus was seized, and fear scattered the disciples like leaves in the wind. Yet something inside John refused to abandon him. He followed from a distance, his heart pounding as he watched the unjust trial, unable to comprehend how the world could condemn the only perfectly innocent man he had ever known. Every insult hurled at Jesus felt like a blow to John's own soul. When the cross was raised on the hill, John stood with Mary, his grief almost too heavy to bear. Watching Jesus suffer was a pain he could not have imagined, and he felt helpless as the sky darkened above them. Even in agony, Jesus' eyes found his, entrusting Mary to his care with a tenderness that shattered him. In that moment, John understood that love was not fragile. It was powerful enough to endure even death. 3 days later came the news that changed everything. The tomb was empty. Mary Magdalene's voice trembled with urgency as she spoke, and John ran faster than he ever had in his life, his heart racing with confusion and a desperate flicker of hope. When he arrived and saw the burial cloths neatly folded, a realization washed over him like light breaking through the night. Jesus had kept his promise. Death had not held him. Seeing the risen Jesus with his own eyes brought a joy John struggled to contain. The Master stood before them, hands scarred yet glowing with life, speaking words of peace that calmed their troubled hearts. His presence filled the room with a strength and warmth that made John feel as though every broken piece of him had been restored. When the Holy Spirit descended upon them, John felt a fire ignite within him. It was as though the breath of Jesus had settled permanently in his soul, guiding him, emboldening him, and reminding him that his life was no longer his own. He embraced the mission entrusted to him, spreading the message of love, redemption, and eternal hope to all who were willing to hear. Years passed, and John became a pillar among believers. He spoke not only of miracles and teachings, but of the heart of Jesus, his gentleness, his patience, his unwavering love. His words touched thousands, offering guidance to new communities rising across distant lands. But with growth also came opposition, and the followers of Christ faced persecution more brutal than John had ever imagined. Through trials, imprisonments, and threats, John remained steadfast. His faith, forged in the presence of Jesus himself, could not be shaken by fear or violence. Yet even the strongest hearts feel the weight of loss. He watched friends and fellow apostles fall, giving their lives for the truth they carried. Each death carved new scars into John's spirit, yet strengthened his resolve to continue. Eventually, John was exiled to a barren island far from the people he once shepherded. Patmos was desolate, silent, a place meant to extinguish voices of influence. Yet even there God met him in the isolation. Surrounded by jagged rocks and endless sea, John felt heaven open above him in a way he had never experienced before. What was intended to silence him became the very place where God entrusted him with visions unlike anything the world had ever seen. One day, as the wind howled against the cliffs, John felt a presence so overwhelming that it drove him to his knees. The veil between heaven and earth seemed to tear open, and what he beheld defied human language. He saw the glory of the Lamb, radiant and victorious, surrounded by celestial beings whose praise echoed like thunder. He saw battles between light and darkness, the final defeat of evil, and the restoration of all things. The visions were both terrifying and breathtaking, filled with symbols and mysteries that John struggled to comprehend. Yet through every revelation, one truth remained unshakable: God would triumph, justice would come, love would prevail. The world, broken and bruised as it was, would one day be made whole again. Writing these revelations felt like carrying fire in his hands, but he knew they were not his to keep. They belonged to the generations to come. As years continued to pass, John remained the last living apostle, a bridge between the time when Jesus walked the earth and the era of a growing church seeking direction. His body aged, but the fire in his heart never dimmed. He continued teaching, writing, and reminding believers of the command Jesus had repeated most often: to love one another. That, more than anything, was the foundation of everything he had learned. In his final days, John often reflected on the journey that had shaped him. From the shores of Galilee to the foot of the cross, from the empty tomb to the visions of heaven, he realized that every step had been guided by love. Not a love based on emotion alone, but a love rooted in sacrifice, truth, and unwavering devotion. It was the same love that had called him from the fishing boat so many years before. He remembered Jesus' voice, gentle yet powerful, calling his name with purpose. He remembered the warmth in his eyes, the way his presence brought peace, even in chaos. Every memory felt alive, as if Jesus was still walking beside him. John understood that his purpose had never been fame or recognition, but simply to reflect the love he had received from the one who changed his life. As his strength faded and the world around him grew quiet, John found comfort in knowing that the message he carried would continue to echo long after he was gone. He had seen the heart of God, witnessed the power of resurrection, and felt the breath of the Spirit. He knew with certainty that nothing, not suffering, not exile, not even death, could separate them from the love of Christ. His final reflections were not of sorrow, but of gratitude. Gratitude for the privilege of walking with the Messiah, for the revelations entrusted to him, and for the chance to pour hope into the lives of countless believers. He hoped that future generations would understand what he had learned painfully and beautifully over a lifetime, that love is the greatest truth and faithfulness the greatest strength. John's life became a testament that ordinary people could be transformed when they surrendered to God's call. He proved that even a fisherman from a quiet village could become a voice of eternal significance. His writings, his memories, and his devotion would become manuscripts of courage for believers across centuries. Through storms, miracles, betrayals, and revelations, John discovered that faith was not the absence of struggle, but the endurance of trust. Each trial became another chapter in the story God was writing through him. And though he witnessed both the darkest and the most glorious moments of history, he held firmly to hope. His final breath carried the same truth he had spoken all his life, that light would always overcome darkness, that God's promises never return empty, and that every soul who follows the path of love will find strength beyond their understanding. And with that conviction, John's story transcended time, becoming a legacy that continues to inspire hearts seeking faith and purpose.